a packed session here with some great key guest panelists who are going to talk to us about what's happening in India and some of the opportunities to come. Apologies for the slight delay, but we're going to hopefully we're moving along things now. I just wanted to kind of start off by saying and thank you all for joining, but also a special thank you to ACMA, the Automotive Component Manufacturers Association of India, who we partnered with to put together the content for this session. And this is a quite important association in India, representing most of the automotive suppliers, component base, and clearly such an important time to be coming together during this crisis. Now, of course, you know, India is a vibrant automotive market and a vibrant supply chain, and we see and have seen considerable growth opportunity. But nonetheless, the country, much like the rest of the world right now, is facing a serious crisis. For India, this began with some headwinds even beforehand in terms of some credit crunch and some regulatory issues, but clearly now has been in lockdown since the 22nd of March, and it's quite a strict lockdown if you even compare to some other countries. And clearly this is a big strain on the automotive industry and the supply chain. But we're not just going to talk about the crisis today, although we'll be giving plenty of updates on this. We also want to look beyond. We're going to be talking about opportunities to come in the global import and export of parts and in the supply chain in India for automotive manufacturers and from a logistics point of view as well. So a quick kind of overview for you in terms of how the session will run today. We're going to have a couple of live polls. We'll hear a bit more briefly on the India supply chain context. We'll share some insights on the global situation as the crisis develops. We'll be bringing in our panel for a quite extensive Q&A, which we've divided into two parts. We'll be talking a bit more to start about the current crisis and how we're managing and mitigating that. And then we'll, as I mentioned, we'll talk a little bit more about the opportunities to come. I'll be bringing them on shortly, but I just wanted to give you an overview of the great panel that we have with you. Most of whom are actually already with us, some of whom will be joining us throughout the hour. We're going to be hearing from Sanjay Kapoor, who's the chairman of Sona Comstar and the vice president of ACMA, who will be briefly giving you some more insights specifically on India shortly. I'm very pleased as well that we'll be having KV Praveen, who's Director of Purchasing for Asia Pacific and BCC at Meritor, obviously an important supplier. Vikram Singhania, who's the Managing Director of JK Center, again, a key automotive supplier here in India. Jasjit Sethi, very pleased to welcome, CEO of TCI Supply Chain Solutions, one of the major logistics providers in India, and especially so in the automotive space. And Vinny Mehta, who's the Director General of ACMA, will also be there. We'll also be joined at some point during the session by Amlan Bose, who's the Vice President of Global Center of Excellence, Global Center of Excellence for Supply Chain, Logistics, Trade, Digitalization, Automation, and a few other areas for Ford Motor, a key logistics leader here in India. Someone that we know well as automotive logistics, and we'll be excited to have him with us in the Q&A. So what I'd like to do now is to bring on Sanjay. Sanjay, are you there? Could you want to join us? There you are, Sanjay. Excellent to see you.
Good to see you. Thank you, Christopher.
So what I thought, Sanjay, I just wanted to hand it over to you to kick us off with a bit of welcome and intro and give us some context before we bring more of the panelists on. So Sanjay, thank you.
Great. Good afternoon. I'd like to welcome you all. We have here Mr. Praveen, we have Vikram Singhania, Mr. Jasjit Sethi, Vinny, and Chris, of course, yourself. What I've learned from this crisis and what has become one of my favorite lines to begin with is, in real life, uncertainty makes it easy to make decisions. And I think, we're all in such uncertain times that, we know suddenly we know exactly what to do. Case in point, us going digital at the rate that we're going digital. But let me introduce you to ACMA for shortly, just to let you know that ACMA has over 800 member companies, and our aim is really to develop a globally competitive auto component industry, and strengthen its role in national economic development, as well as promote business through international alliances. We have, we do combined sales of $57 billion with an export of $16 billion, and we contribute 2.3% of the GDP. We contribute to 2.3% of the GDP. Our aftermarket business is $10.1 billion, and we employ close to, or in the range of 5 million people, direct and indirect, in the auto component industry. We've all seen challenging times in ACMA. We've of course looked at our business model. Today we're focused on most of what's going on today. When we look at the economy, really we look at it calls for a restart, a reshape, and a reimagine, and that's really become key for any business today, given the kind of situation we're going through. In the automotive industry especially, we're going through an even rougher time, because we've had almost 15 months of a rough economy in terms of sales, in terms of regulations, especially in India, and now to be hit with a situation where most companies are close to zero revenue. It's been a difficult, it's been a difficult time for us. However, we see opportunities like any industry. We do see opportunities going forward. We'll see a lot of change in the supply chain. We've already seen some geopolitical changes in terms of announcements made by Japan to move supply chain out of China. We feel that this could be an opportunity for India. We're also looking at supply chain in terms of localization. There will be a huge drive, I believe, to localize supply chain, just to de-risk from events like this that happen globally. We've seen a lot of, we've engaged heavily with OEMs during this period of time, which has been a great learning for us as a component industry. We've seen the component industry really come together as one body, as one organization, through ACMA, and we've noticed that OEMs are very encouraging in terms of localization, and I feel this will happen across the globe. So these are things that we need to look out for. When you look at the automotive industry or any industry in this environment, I think the next 3 months is about survival. How do we survive this downturn or this crisis that we're in? And from this, will emerge a very, very different economy, and we all know that. That we will be in a very different economy when we emerge from this crisis. If you look at what happened in World War II, there was the introduction of women in the workforce. If you look at what happened after 9/11, there was heightened security. If you look at SARS, that's when Alibaba took off. And now, if you look now, it will really be the restructuring of supply chains and the restructuring of our entire manufacturing setup. So I feel that there is a huge opportunity here for companies. We're sitting, almost at an inflection point. When we do emerge from this crisis, that we will see opportunities. And as they say, in every crisis, there is an opportunity. I feel that, there will be winners that come out of this. I also feel that, once an antiviral is out, a vaccine is about 12 months away, but once an antiviral is out, it'll change the dynamics of what the economy looks like. It'll definitely improve the economy in terms of sales, in terms of giving a boost to the economy. So whilst it looks grim at this point in time, I'm certain that it will get better. And if you look at the other side, the longer this goes on, the more chances that new businesses will emerge. So we're really looking at our business and seeing what's it look like 2 or 3 quarters out. When will the real recovery come? And from an ACMA perspective, we're focusing on, we've developed 3 task force. We've created 3 task force. One to look at policy and government matters, interfacing with OEMs, etc. Because there's a lot of policy going to be on a lot of government intervention in terms of the spread of COVID-19, in terms of how we restart. Today in India, we're looking at restarting. Some companies were supposed to start on the 20th of April. We're now looking at restarting sometime this week. Some of us will, some of us won't. Some of us will wait till the 4th of May. However, this is a situation that we really don't understand completely. If you look at Singapore, they went back into lockdown till the 1st of June. So again, a big risk. So we've created a task force that deals with policy. We've created a task force that looks at social services. One of the key issues that we're facing is labor, is migrant labor. How do we manage migrant labor at this point in time? How do migrant labor get fed? How are they looked after? And how do we bring migrant labor back? If I were to define this crisis, and if I were to define the three secures that you need to come out of this crisis, it would be labor, cash flow, and raw material. And raw material really relates to supply chain. So supply chain is a big issue, and we need to look at it very carefully. Our third task force, of course, is looking at manufacturing of medical equipment. You've heard a lot of talk about automotive companies getting involved in ventilator manufacturing, in masks, etc., because of the setups that we have, whether it be in technology with fabrics or technology in 3D printing, etc., to look at ventilator designs. So there's a lot going on in that on that front as well. So, I mean, that's really the overview from my perspective. Supply chain is absolutely key in terms of what happens next. I also feel that there's a great opportunity in the supply chain in terms of localization, in terms of looking at a completely new shift, a paradigm shift in terms of, where we have been. And this is, we need to look at this positively, and we need to look at this as an opportunity. Thanks, Christopher.
Sanjay, thank you so much, and I think you really hit on some key points there and things that we're observing in this crisis around the world right now in all regions, and particularly I think one of the points is the vital aspect that supply chain is playing here, and I think it's almost fair to say that everyone is becoming something of a amateur supply chain enthusiast of kind, whether it's tracking how governments are procuring PPE or checking how well firms can respond to the online delivery, in our everyday lives under lockdown. And I think as we move towards production restart and distribution restart, the companies that have supply chain resilience and supply chain agility and visibility at the heart are going to be the ones that emerge stronger. So I think you've definitely put it in an interesting context there. Before we kind of move on to some of our panel and some other points, though, let's kind of take that question, if you like, to the audience, and let's do a poll to get a sense of how everyone is sort of feeling about how India supply chain will kind of emerge as we come out of this. So I'm gonna launch the poll for everyone to kind of have a vote of, which is coming to you soon. So the question is for everyone to vote on: after lockdown restrictions in India ease, how long will it take supply chain to resume stable production? So not necessarily high level volumes, but how long will it take, do you think, to achieve some sort of stability? Is it 1 to 2 weeks, 2 to 4 weeks, 4 to 6 weeks, 6 to 8 weeks, or indeed longer than 8 weeks? So I can see everyone is rushing to vote now. I'm just going to give it another 10, 15 seconds for the audience to tell us their thoughts. And it's quite an interesting spread, I can say, from where I see the voting is. So let's close the poll and share it with everyone. So it's kind of it couldn't be more split in some ways. It's almost I think one thing we're sure of, the only thing we're sure of here is that it won't be a quick switch on and off. So 1 to 2 weeks, almost very few think it'd be that quick. But most are split between 2 to 4 weeks, ranging, right way back through to longer than 8 weeks. A very small majority, very, very small edge for longer than 8 weeks there. So I think clearly it's complex. It's going to take some coordination, and obviously one of the points that I want to raise later is the possibility of collaboration across that as well. So interesting to see that. Let's just take a very brief global tour. One of the things ACMA talked to me about and said, can we share some global perspectives for our audience here, which is comprised not just of India, but we do have a global audience even on the live stream right now. Just kind of briefly, let's talk to some of the key things that are happening in the key regions and how it will relate. We're going to bring that into the Q&A and how it relates to India. So again, if we turn to China, this is obviously where the crisis began, and clearly where the containment was kind of held to first. As we've seen, activity continues to pick up, both economic and industrial. All the automotive plants are running again, that doesn't say that they're at 100% capacity. We hear reports between 50, 60, 70%, depending on manufacturer. Wuhan, for example, would be further back from that. But they are moving back, and there is reports of increasing dealer activity. The government has listed some incentives to promote, for example, EVs, car limits. So there is activity, and we hear a lot about that. However, I think on the point of supply chain, which Sanjay just raised, which is important to note, the Chinese supply chain is already facing the risk of some disruption. So we know from our contacts in China that there are suppliers who are worried about supplies, particularly out of Europe. Germany is a big exporter to China, for example, and could see it coming from elsewhere as well in terms of South Korea and the US. So no supply chain in these days is in a vacuum, and certainly not for China. But there, we're also hearing reports of increasing focus on localization in China too. And I think the Chinese economy will suffer from some export declines, broadly speaking, anyway. And the logistics network in China still disrupted. Ports in terms of blank sailings, in terms of the air freight capacity, so plenty of issues still there. If we turn to Europe, just briefly, this is the next stage, as we've talked about some of these live streams. This is the next stage of where some restarts are happening. This week especially is a kind of a key one. Mercedes and have a number of OEMs have restarted component plants, including Mercedes, Volkswagen, BMW, and we're seeing more assembly plants open. There's a list there. I won't go through them line by line, but it's a slow and somewhat coordinated restart, at least within the larger groups. Volkswagen turning a number of key plants on this week, for example, in Zwickau and in Slovakia, and more coming on next week. We see somewhat similar with Mercedes, which is component plants this week, truck plants, and some more assembly plants next week. Toyota in a small way in France, and Volvo as well. The larger share of this is expected to come in May, but the key point is that this is still subject to restrictions, still subject to development in the market and in the supply chain. We just confirmed that Kia, which was the first to restart in Slovakia back in April 6th, did have to suspend production for a few days, for 3 or 4 days this week, because of supply shortages. So there you already see the fragility in the market, and that the supply chain is going to play a key role. Demand is obviously going to be massive here, and we are forecasting potential impacts of 30% drops in the market. But it is notable that Germany is allowing its states to reopen dealer sales, which will allow some movement through dealers. Inevitably, we don't think any automotive supply chain can stay open for too long if there isn't obviously an order book to fill. So the degree to which vehicle sales activity can pick back up will be key here. So Germany starting it, we'll see it in a few other markets as well. Port space increasingly an issue. Logistics networks are an issue. Borders are tight. They're not closed for freight, but we definitely see lots of traffic and queues. So there's definitely some issues as this coordination kicks off. Briefly to North America, a bit behind probably Europe in that sense. We see some suppliers beginning some restarts. Some early beginning. Again, Kia, one of the first out of the line. Mercedes in Alabama, and Volkswagen planning sometime in the next week in Tennessee and Chattanooga. Most of the OEMs are still planned for May, or in fact have not yet set definitive dates as things move along. Key points there: federal guidelines do indicate that vehicle dealerships can open for sales, which they hadn't before. So some states may move to that, but as we know, there's some distinct variations in the lockdown measures across the U.S., and that is definitely going to play a role in the how the industry can come back. And we should highlight what we understand from lots of OEM and Tier 1 contacts: Mexico is considered a risk. The outbreak could come later there, and if the network and suppliers are closed off more from Mexico, that's going to have a big impact in the U.S. as well. So again, the idea that things can happen in a vacuum here is probably not so accurate. It will have links. I won't go through this in detail because this very much echoes, I think, some of the points from Sanjay. But what we're seeing is the new normal that we're coming back into, and I think this will be very equally relevant for India as production does start again. It will come with new PPE requirements, new social safety aspects in the plant and in operations. supply chain likely to remain highly volatile. We have plenty of liquidity risks, which Sanjay mentioned, and our analysts have particularly identified tier 2, tier 3 levels at which the risk might be highest, where the cash might be most strapped, and also amongst some logistics providers in some areas where liquidity could be quite tight. Demand shocks to come. Obviously, the constraints in the sales market is still an issue, and I think perhaps an issue going out, which we might have to look carefully at. We were already dealing with it well before the crisis, is protectionism and trade disputes. The degree to which that may accelerate, get worse, or change in the wake of the crisis, we identify as a pretty significant risk, and something that could potentially affect the automotive supply chain in a big way. But to come back to the point again, which I want to kind of keep in mind, and I think for all of us in this sector, supply chain is king here. Resilience is a big factor. So looking at inventory strategies and how you can respond in production, and obviously to demand as it turns back on, response to change in supply chain, visibility, and opportunities for automation and digitalization. Those are some key global themes, if you like, which keep emerging for us, and which I personally think are likely to be very key also in the supply chain for India as we recover. So that was our, if you like, our quick kind of intro to India and what's happening in the global context. It's now really my pleasure to start bringing our panel onto the stage, let's say it, and onto our virtual stage here, so we can move into some Q&A. So I would like to invite back our panelists to join me visually. So we have, as I mentioned before, Kavi Praveen from Meritor. So Praveen, if you want to join us when you're ready. Also, I'd like to welcome Jasjit Sethi from TCI Solutions. Welcome back Sanjay Kapoor as well. That's it. Hi, Praveen. Jasjit is there. Sanjay, great to have you back again. And Vikran, can we? And I think there's Vikran who's joined us as well. Wonderful to see you, Vikran. And Vinny Mehta also from ACMA. That's great. So welcome everybody again. It's great to have you here. We have a fantastic audience here, who's already been sending through loads of questions, which we're gonna look to turn to as much as we can here. And if we can't answer all of them, we'll try and get answers in a follow-up as well. But let's start the discussion. We had a great intro there from Sanjay in terms of what's happening. You saw that what the audience thinks about how long it will take to resume operations in the supply chain once lockdowns are eased, kind of split there. Let's start on that point. Do you think that as India resumes production, when it's able to, that there will be further delays and difficulties in getting going because of issues in the supply chain, whether that's obtaining parts or dealing with logistics constrictions? Vikran, why don't we start with you on that one? So what do you think from a tier supplier perspective? Are we likely to face some further constraints as we get going?
Sure. Thank you. Good to be on, Chris. Thank you for inviting us to be part of this. At ACMA, we've been working very closely with and under our leadership of Sanjay and the president and Vinny. The team has been working very closely with all the OEs and the OEMs in India, and have been talking to them on what their thoughts are and how the supplier chain can cooperate with them. So while they're doing a lot of work hand in hand with the supplier base to try and examine the entire chain end to end, however, as we go along, I do believe that somewhere in the chain there could be challenges that we may not be all able to synchronize supplies in one go. From an OE perspective, till they don't have all the parts in one place, they cannot produce a car. So it's not good to have a certain set of parts and not have a certain set of parts. That's on the physical side. But also, I think challenges of each of the hotspots being different at different points of time, and different regions becoming green and red at different points of time may warrant some degree of start-stop or some degree of a jagged edge supply chain. I'm not bringing in the complication of parts that are imported, which because they have their own challenges of supply chain depending on where they're coming from. And of course, I mean, you have the logistics experts here. They'll be able to tell us the real challenges on the ground. So my view is that while we're all working very hard together as the component industry and the OEs to try and smoothen this as much as possible, I do believe that we will see a certain bit of a jagged-edged recovery or a certain jagged-edged part of this whole supply chain, keeping in mind just too many moving parts in this supply chain.
Absolutely. Sanjay, would you echo anything that? Would you add anything differently from that point of view?
Yeah, Vikram's spot on. I'd just like to add that given the new environment with social distancing, the new standard operating procedures that we need to put in place, that's definitely going to be a huge challenge. From ACMA's perspective and from CI, which is the Confederation of Indian Industries perspective, we've been in conversation with several local bodies and governments. And I think the fear is what happens if one or two people test positive once we begin operations, and then the operations again have to be stopped because the government may mandate us to stop that operation altogether, not just quarantine those people. So one part is that. The other part, I think, is migrant labor. We've had an issue of migrant labor going back home. Bringing labor back is definitely going to delay it. So when I looked at that survey, 1 to 2 weeks, definitely not. I'd say we were more in the 4 to 6 weeks range to bring the supply chain back to anything that's normal, not to full capacity. I also feel that when we restart, we're going to have to start with a much smaller or fewer labor people, so a smaller labor force, because again, social distancing norms mandate that we have a 6 feet or 1 meter different gap between people. So, bringing everything back online and finding the right people, getting people out of their homes, again, killing the fear, because it's all a mindset. I think when the mindset changes, the economy will come back. But with this kind of fear, we're always going to have. So people is going to be a big challenge for us.
Absolutely. I think that the labor point is really key, and perhaps especially for India, for the points that you mentioned. Vikram mentioned he wouldn't touch on the imported part risk, and then I thought maybe a good person to maybe address that potential risk would be Praveen as a role in purchasing. To what extent do you think that any issues or constraints in the global supply chain, sort of the imported parts that India uses, could also delay or cause some jagged edges in the resumption of production when it gets going again in India?
Yeah, thank you, Chris, for making me a part of this discussion, and very happy to be here. I think that the way, going by the survey again, it was very useful to know that there is quite a well spread response between 2 to 8 weeks. But I think given the supply chain design that has been there, with especially from an export standpoint from India and China together, even if it is going to be a 4-week recovery, it is a very tough one to manage. So when we really look at beyond 6 to 8 weeks, it's definitely going to have a major impact on the global supply chain platform too. That kind of a resilience, even though I would say that every OEs or tier ones globally have certain amount of resilience built in terms of their inventory and buffers and things like that, but still through the supply chain, and when we have so much of efficiency that has been built over a period of time with a greater effectiveness on supply chain, now no OEs or no tier ones would have such a big buffer built. So it's going to really strain. We are all eagerly looking forward. Like you mentioned in your presentation, China recovered to some extent, but if India do not recover within the, let's say, 4 to 6 weeks time frame, it is going to cause a major disruption in the global supply chain. Yes, that's my view.
Absolutely. One of the things, and Sanjay mentioned liquidity right at the beginning. Vinny, maybe I can turn to you on this one. maybe from an ACMA point of view in particular. Do you see supplier distress and the risk of sort of potential bankruptcies as another potential pitfall as we go forward?
Chris, thank you for having me. I think one of the biggest challenges that is facing the industry today is that of working capital and liquidity. Though the Central Bank of India, which is the Reserve Bank of India, has taken a lot of measures to infuse liquidity into the system, the banks unfortunately are not passing it on to the industry. So definitely for quite a few of the companies, especially small and medium enterprises in the tier 2 and tier 3, they are literally facing the challenge of staying solvent. So this may well be an issue. ACMA has made some brilliant effort in terms of communicating to all the OEMs to make sure all the payments are cleared for their suppliers. That is some solace, but not enough, because the government has also mandated for us to pay for all the workers, and both who are permanent as well as contractual, to pay for the entire period of the lockdown. So that is somewhat stressful for a whole lot of companies, because as Sanjay said initially, we're literally in a zero revenue regime. So that's a huge challenge.
Absolutely. Jajib, I'd like to bring you in this from, because when we talk about suppliers, we obviously, in many cases thinking of component suppliers, but what about the similar challenges that the logistics suppliers and providers are facing? And do you think, one, liquidity amongst freight carriers is in of itself a big risk, and perhaps any other comments on the role, the risks in the logistics network that you see in the restart?
Myself.
So, yeah, there you go.
Good evening, friends. Hi, Chris. Good to be here. I think that's a very important subject at this point in time. You see, the logistics provider work like a glue between the manufacturers, the tier 1, as well as the OEMs. That's been our role throughout. And the supply chain for automotive is very mature compared to any other, even more than retail as well. Everybody's on a just-in-time and just-in-sequence. So things are very well oiled and very mature. When things like this happen, a disruption, and as somebody rightly mentioned, you require maybe 1,000 parts to make a car, at least the aggregates. You don't have 10, the car's not going to get made. So in this point of time, you have to look at what are the alternative supply sources, whether you have a single source supplier or multiple, which are in which zone, what's your pipeline inventory, are you carrying any safety stock? So entire supply chain needs to get redesigned. Our role at this point changes now from being a just-in-time supplier to maybe supplying through a vendor managed inventory. And we see some of that coming in. As of today, we took stock of how things are. About 9% of plants have started in the country. I'm talking about the OEMs. And about 20% dispatches have started as of today. These are very baby steps, because a lot of work has to be done in sanitizing the plant in terms of physical distancing and stuff like that. So getting it back to steam will take a little bit of time. The overall community which serves the automotive supply chain from the inbound side is not very large. It's a very few players, because it's more of a technology along with a physical network piece. So there are not too many players in this, and all of them are probably more sound. You could have problems on the side of the finished vehicles, because that is where the market is rather fragmented and it's asset based. People have been out on the roads for a month or so, drivers not there. So people who could maybe get finance and buy a few trucks could also get some business. But going forward, I think financial strengths will come into being. It's been mentioned earlier also. So I think by around what we call as a season of Diwali, that's going to be reckoning time. We might have many people run out of money by the time it comes as Diwali.
Okay, yeah, that's certainly obviously would be sad news during a festive period. So hopefully that's not what we get to. What does the panel think about what perhaps OEMs or even larger tier 1s, might further do, or can they do anything more to sort of support suppliers or providers in distress? I mean, Vinny talked earlier about some measures to to keep payments going through, and obviously there's access from the government. Is there anything else that should be considered or is sort of possible right now? Maybe I can start with Vikram again on that one.
Sure. I think, like Vinny said, I think the OEs here have been, I think, very understanding to understand that this whole chain is critical to their own interest. So it's a symbiotic relationship, clearly. And when it's a symbiotic relationship, it's about not just the physicals, but it's about people, it's about finance, it's about the whole 9 yards, in its way. So I think the OE has been very upfront, and I think very participative with the component guys. They're working very closely to figure out what is happening to payments. And I think I can say it on this call, people who've in the past, OEs who have not been the best paymasters have also stepped out of their way. At least the majority of them have stepped out of their way to try and make sure that payments are passed on. And clearly the tier ones and the tier twos also need to do the same along the chain. I think they're also working, I think what I'm hearing from OEs, and we had one call 2 hours back also at ACMA, what increasingly I'm hearing this whole idea of cooperating and co-creating even deeper and deeper. So clearly they are looking at Indian suppliers to be able to bring back supply chain closer to home and be able to co-partner and co-create and look at creative ways of trying to solve this short-term, medium-term supply chain challenge. So I think they're doing a good job. We need to keep at it, and I think both sides need to play their part. The component guys need to step up their plate and get into design and start doing a lot of work from that side. And the OEs continue to need to reach out and co-work with this whole supply chain. So I think we can do more, but I think it's a good beginning.
Yeah, absolutely. Clearly, everyone is in it together there, and the point that I think was already raised as well. That, we're only as strong as the weakest link here. So any point at which breaks is obviously going to cause a lot of distress further. One point that I did want to ask, though, in terms of looking across the supply chain, do you think that Indian OEMs and international purchasing operators and organizations have enough visibility of where this risk may be in terms of looking across the tier N supply chain, so deeper down, and perhaps even if we think about even other not just the components but the equipment manufacturers and the other sort of ancillary services and providers who could also be distressed and cause issues. So maybe I'll turn to Praveen again on that one before someone else, if you think that visibility is robust, or what measures can be taken to improve it.
Yeah, I think that as we go down in the tier 2, tier 3, and tier 4 levels, there is a lot more dependency on the kind of as we go down the value chain there, and that's one of the biggest threat. Like Vinny was mentioning in the beginning, that there are some challenges around there, especially when we get to the tier 2 and tier 3s, where they're all kind of small scale, micro, we call it as MSMEs here. There's going to be a challenge, one on the people side of it. Second thing is also going to be heavily on the liquidity front. I've been recently reading some report that nearly 30% of those MSME sectors may not come back in the near future, and there's going to be a new, like you talked about in the beginning, a kind of a new normal. So there's going to be some opportunity for somebody else to come back, but about 30% of those tier 2, tier 3s could be a challenge to come back. I see in terms of building more resilience, tier 1s and the OEs, there is a certain amount of insourcing of certain critical components and critical operations may happen, especially at the tier 1s, may not be at the OEs more, but at the tier 1s, I see the possibility of building that. And second thing is also going to be a layered sourcing, which is kind of very heavily being practiced, but I see more and more of such phenomenon coming up in future.
Okay, thank you very much. And does that echo? Does anyone else feel there's any other key aspects around? I think the visibility point is sort of key here. So if anyone else wants, I think Praveen hit on some key notes there. But Sanjay, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, so I think I just want to add to everything that's been said. One of the key things is to what we've been doing is tracking our supply base. Not just from availability of raw material and cash, but also people. And I keep going back to people because this is critical. What we've done is we've obviously tracked our own people in terms of how many people we have locally, how many are migrant, how many are ill, how many family members may fall ill. Again, keeping in mind COVID testing and etc. And we've asked our supply base to also track their people and their suppliers in turn, so that we're ready and to go when we need to be ready to go. And just to again go back to your earlier question, I think companies in India fortunately have built a very robust business over the last 10 years since we went through the last downturn, and I feel that we've had fewer bankruptcies in this crisis than we did in 2008. So that goes to show that the businesses are more robust. I feel that companies that are over leveraged will definitely face challenging times. The government has stepped in terms of moratorium with loans for companies that are over leveraged, and they can take advantage of that. Now, do I feel that there will be competitors that I can buy in the future? Definitely. Do I feel that the global competitive supply chain will change? Definitely. I'm certain that I will have global competitors that may go out of business, given the fact that they may be over leveraged and given the fact that this crisis has come at this time and it's so hard. So I think, but from the Indian perspective, I think we're well positioned because of the sort of businesses we've built. The OEMs are working together to make sure that the entire supply chain is operating, because it doesn't make sense if one OEM pays us and the others don't, because we'll fail anyway. So it won't make sense to that OEM. So I think the OEMs coming together, the automotive component companies coming together, this is a great opportunity and a great time that we've seen this kind of collaboration between companies, between competitors, between OEMs.
Excellent, thank you for that, Sanjay. Before I turn to some questions from the audience, because there's quite a few of them have sort of flooded in. Jazjit, turning a bit more on some of the logistics issues as well. I mean, we talked there about liquidity for quite a while, but clearly the networks are certainly likely quite disrupted, I would imagine. I mean, I think there's cargo flowing between state borders again, but nonetheless, do you anticipate what do you think the industry has to do now to kind of work out kinks in the transport and logistics flow in order to get back to stability when we start moving again?
Chris, in our country, while we have a Disaster Management Act of 2005, we don't really have anything in place with regard to supply chain. This has been one time where after the lockdown was launched, the first few changes were with regard to transport, logistics, supply chain, because I think the government also understood that they need to keep essential and non-essential also moving. So trucking has been allowed, and we have been operating either trucks or ships or trains every single day, operating warehouses as well along this time. Some of the other transport commodities can move to rail. For example, cement, steel, they can go to rail. But because of the nature of our cargo and the kind of distances we have, this will remain more of a play of the road network. We feel that the network is ready to cope up and step forward. With regard to the basics with the transport trade, things have not deteriorated. Yes, there are a lot of drivers who have gone back, but that is because they did not have any ecosystem on the highway. They start return back as things are better. We have been operating some warehouses already for essential commodities. And I can share you some learnings which we have had from operating during the COVID is that the entire process which used to have of inwarding of people into a facility, to their workbenches, to this, to the overall protocol of interaction during the canteen has changed completely. And even for drivers, when they come in, the cabins are cleaned, the hands are sanitized, PPE is a must. So this new normal is teaching us a lot of new things, because anybody coming out today to work also has a social fear behind him, that if he goes back to his hometown or his family, he should not infect anybody else in his family or neighborhood. So that is a big responsibility which each one of us have, and both as employers as well as citizens of the country. So once things start to move up, and they have started, as I mentioned in our informal chat earlier. So in automotive, also linked with automotive, with many of the ACMA members supply to are the earthmoving equipment, the big machineries. Then you have the farm equipment. So these have started to already operate. Farm equipment and implements have started. So some of this movement and plant have started. At some locations where there was enough stock and there were a lot of dealer bookings, those plants have started. So last 2-3 days have been more with regard to sanitization, but work actually has begun there, and things are moving on the ground. That is not an issue. With regard to the highway support system, it's always been informal with the dhabas and others. So that is going to take some time to come in, but people have also innovated in the driver community as well. They have things like ready to eat, which they can just cook quite quickly, and many drivers used to anyway carry some kind of a cooking system with them. So they're kind of quite self-sufficient on the highways. One advantage which we already have is a lot of electronic payments have been there. So there's no need to give a cash to a driver. These have helped in terms of overall supply chain not being that badly affected. We're affected more because our customers or down the end retailers, they are closed.
Absolutely. Praveen, again, from a kind of maybe from an import and export point of view, do you see kind of continuing risks or changes that need to happen on the logistics and kind of supply chain management side to help that the flow continue and not to like fall back on commitments and volumes as things pick up?
Yes, I mean, this is not specific to the current COVID situation. Even before, we one of the things that we lack from India is also on the effectiveness of the global supply chain. And when I say that, it is especially on the logistics front of it. We get sometimes from India hampered by both in terms of time and also in terms of the cost on the when it comes to the global supply chain and freight management. So there are definitely more opportunities in India's way if we are able to manage the freight and transport costs not only within the country and also in the overseas. That includes the end-to-end, starting from the door of the supply from the auto component manufacturer to the where it needs to be delivered in the other countries, in the Western countries specifically. So there is a lot of optimization that can be done in inland, at ocean, and also in the at the destination levels. One thing that we have also seen is there is a lot of improvement in terms of the warehousing that happens that the Indian suppliers have been using very effectively. That's a positive outlook at this point of time. But going forward, these efficiencies around the managing the global supply chain is going to be crucial, and that's going to be a key, I would say, input or the key indicator as we move forward with some opportunities from India.
Thank you. Yeah, I want to turn to a question that we have from our audience. Again, there's quite a few, so I'll pick a few rather than trying to go through all of them right now. So one question, it's in the news that some industrial activity started in Uttarakhand this week. Government is restrictive in allowing permissions elsewhere. So the question is actually around the key challenge and punitive measures for industry leaders if any cases are found on their premises. So I guess COVID cases. Does ACMA have a view on this, and how does ACMA intend to navigate this with the government? Perhaps Vinny, can I turn to you on that one, maybe to address it?
I think that's a very valid question, a very valid point. I think I would deal it in two parts. The first point is that, we are a federal structure, and every state has its own, if I may say, directives, and they are giving out directives. Also, there are these zones, the red zones and the amber zones and the green zones. The red zones, you cannot operate, amber partly, and green, you cannot. So there's a challenge on that front, but definitely a huge concern with all of us is that, should an employee be found COVID positive, we do not want any punitive measure coming on to the management of the organization. And secondly, currently, in our perspective, the law is a wee bit retrograde, wherein it tends to seize the facility, lock down the facility, and operations are suspended for probably 14 odd days. So this is somewhat scary, and we are talking to the government and also in industry bodies that represents many sectors, so as they could take the case forward. I think Sanjay raised a point. He has a point to make.
So let me chime in here. Thanks, Vinny. Let me just further what Vinny said. He's absolutely right. State governments are taking their own decisions based on their own experience. This is a very new situation, and therefore there is nothing that is absolutely firm. However, every government official I have spoken to has assured me that their intention is not to prosecute people. If there is a positive case, their intention is probably to shut down the facility. Some people have said they may not shut down the facility. Some say they may shut it down for 28 days, which is, I think, quite drastic. However, with regard to some notifications that have gone on WhatsApp groups, etc., to say that they will prosecute, that is not the case. As long as we're not, as employers, are not hiding the fact that we have COVID positive patients, patients, or we're not, we don't have negligence in terms of following the standard operating procedures. I also did mention to the government that given the fact that we follow standard operating procedures laid out by the government or by the state, there should be no risk of anyone contracting, or a positive case, because we have sufficient social distancing, and therefore someone who comes in positive should not, transfer the virus to somebody else. However, again, this is a very new situation for government, as it is for us, and they're taking every measure to encourage industry, because it's in their interest too. We've got a lot of labor that are out of jobs, and eventually we will run out of money to pay them. So I would not, I would not worry too much.
Okay, thank you both. Quite a key issues there. Another grouping, I would say there's a couple of questions around a similar topic, and so I'll try and bring it together, which is basically whether this crisis, could sort of partly spell the end, or at least a change to aspects of just-in-time and super low lean inventory approaches, with maybe more focus on resilience, more focus on inventory buffers and how to manage that. So I guess, the question is whether the panel agrees with that potential, and also another question to the audience is sort of, well, if it's the case, then who bears the costs of that in terms of carrying higher inventory? Is it going to be the OEM? Is it going to be the tier supplier? Will it ultimately be the customer? So again, that's we could do a whole session probably just debating this. I appreciate that. But maybe I can just start that one with you, Sanjay, just to get some of your views, and then we can see if anyone on the panel wants to chime in. This is quite a key topic.
So I think it's going to be a hybrid approach, and I don't think there's any real answer, because whilst things will change because of this crisis, and attitudes will change, and mindsets will change, and business models will change, I don't think just-in-time or inventory-related issues will drastically change. I don't think we'll have to build extra inventory, because I think there's a cost involved. And as you said, this is a much larger discussion, because there's a whole concept of proximity. If you look at proximity, people want to move closer to the supply chain. If I look at the aftermarket, eventually when things go into when you design through or leave the design on cloud, you can 3D print at home. So there's going to be a lot of disruption in the supply chain. And I don't think at this point in time it would be fair to say that business model will move towards a more inventory-based model. I think there will be a hybrid situation because of the fact that initially there will be fear. Eventually, we'll all learn to live with it. Like I earlier said in my opening remarks, the minute we have an antiviral, not necessarily a vaccine. I think a vaccine will take longer. When we have an antiviral, I think people will be will adjust much or adapt more easily than before.
Absolutely. I see some nodding heads, but does anybody have a further kind of point to specify on that? Or Vikram, did you want to add anything to that?
I know I can add. I agree with Sanjay completely, but it depends on domestic versus global supply chains also. So from a global supply chain perspective, because you have too many, again, links in the chain, temporarily that might be a little bit of a unflattening of the curve, and a little bit of a surge will take place. But like Sanjay said, I think it's a matter of 12 months or an antiviral, or 18 months to 24 months for a vaccine, when things will start slowing down back to normal a little again. So from an inventory perspective, so in the middle term, yes, I think everybody will want to have safety on both sides, on the supplier side as well as the buyer side.
And Jasjit, I mean, is this again from a kind of logistics provider point of view? Does this sort of chime with your seeing and reading of how the situation might change?
I think this is not the last crisis we will have. This one is really a big one. We have seen some other go by us. They have not really come to us. SARS didn't really come to us, nor did Ebola. And 9/11 was also not really so deep for India, and neither was the 2008 crisis. So we haven't really had a crisis come home to us for a while. And will this be the last? Not sure. But what will change is the way the world will get polarized, and there will be more localized supply chains. There will be more amount of distributed share of business coming in. There would also be a lot of more automation which would come in. Today, some of the challenges which we are facing, like Mr. Sanjay also mentioned, is migrant workers, people have gone home. We would see a newer equation of a cost benefit between automation versus the cost. If business continuity were to be important, we would look at more automation, and that would go in all parts of supply chain. It would not stop at either at one location. This is we talk about new normal in terms of how we work. So this particular virus has an issue with metal. We handle all metal parts. Right now we are grappling with the situation of how to clean a truckload of cars, which has been handled by various people when it reaches a destination. So these are very strange and new kind of challenges which we are faced with. And to sanitize everything without spoiling the paint work and stuff like that, how do we plan for it? How do we don't have the human touch? So this kind of stuff is going to take some time to go away. And the fear would remain in people's mind. We would have the deeper and the longer this disruption is, we would have a challenge retail coming back. So what is going to be most relevant for the consumers tomorrow would be important. Could it be that it would start more personal mobility, because people will face it is safer than having to go by the metros and the tube? Maybe yes. How does that change things? Do we look at more small assembly plants than large plants? So I think there's going to be a lot of changes. We would probably start to feel them around the end of this quarter of April to June, which is most likely a lost quarter by all accounts.
Yeah, absolutely. Praveen, I saw you sort of nodding there around some of the points, perhaps around localization or proximity of supply chain. Again, as someone who's so deep in purchasing and playing a key role there, do you agree? Do you see this balance shifting to more domestic, local supply? And I guess if so, how will the trade-off between? Because clearly, when there's international sourcing now, it tends to be to find a lower price in many cases. So, will the balance change between cost versus risk and other kind of considerations?
Yeah. My point will be, yes, there will be definitely a desire from the global OEs and tier ones to look at local, so that they will have a much more, I would say, local and a stronger supply chain. But the point would be, like you rightly pointed out, what would be the balance? The issue on this virus is not just in India, as we all know, it is a global issue. So the local supply chain, when such an issue comes up, it is definitely going to have an impact on the local supply chain too. Number one. Number two, with what has happened with, especially in the Western region, the amount of localization that can be made with respect to the, it can be in terms of capacitization and industrialization within the local supply chain, would also be a constraint. That is what we believe so. And third element is also, like I mentioned in the past, there are opportunities for insourcing, which will also demand a good amount of capital. And there, the issue is again going to be, and under these situations, when the whole world is in a bigger liquidity constraints, will we have enough capital to look at the insourcing by any tier ones or OEs would be a question mark. So in my view, there will be a drive for localization, but I would not believe that it is going to be such a significant one that India will have a difficult situation when it comes to it.
Absolutely. Well, I think on that note, I think we can, I talked about talking a bit about some opportunities, global opportunities, as we kind of move back, kind of deeper into the, or post-crisis, or into the new normal. Maybe before I do that, let's turn to our audience again and do another poll just to get everybody's view. So I've got two quick questions I thought we would share with the audience and get their view, partly related to things we were talking about. So the first question, in terms of related to the kind of liquidity and kind of business risk area. So, how long can your company sustain this shutdown now without risk of failure or closure? So again, related to the points we had earlier, in terms of how long it's going to go on. Do you think 4 weeks, 8 weeks, 12 weeks, 16 weeks, or longer than 16 weeks? It's totally anonymous, by the way, just in case anyone's worried about that information you getting shared. This is not intended to be passed on to any banks or to any kind of public trading. It's just your view in terms of the kind of how long companies in India can manage this in the supply chain. So people are kind of rushing in to vote here. I'll just give it another short couple of seconds as we close up. There was a question earlier about anyone who's missed anything so far. We will be sharing, the couple of slides that we had, and a video of this will be available afterwards. So all the results and everything will be available to everyone who's registered, as well as our network. So I'm going to close the poll and just see what our audience thought. Again, it's not one overwhelming point, but I guess if we the majority kind of see that sort of 8 to 12 weeks if we kind of combine them together. So hopefully, that's going to be the critical point coming up for many, although there's some who see some risks sort of sooner. So again, an interesting view there. Oops, sorry. One more quick poll. Before we get to some of our points. So when production resumes, what will be the most important changes to the Indian automotive supply chain? Greater visibility across the tier end supply chain, increased supplier localization in India, more resilience through inventory and buffer, greater automation and digitalization, or since I couldn't put every possible change here, is it none of these, something else, which of course we can, we'll talk more about. So just give us your view. And it's an interesting mix here. I think the answer will prove to be somewhat clearer than what we had from our audience before. So I will just give that another second and close the poll. Thank you for sharing. Always good to get the vote of the world's largest democracy, right? Increased supplier localization in India at 43% is actually what more of you think as an impact, and we had some interesting discussion around that. Although a fair amount also see greater automation and digitalization, which I think is kind of interesting in the Indian context as well. Okay, thanks for that. So I wanted to, I think Praveen had to leave. I apologize. We know that he had a bit of a hard stop. So Praveen, you're still there. Are you still able to stay with us for, we've got about another 15, 20 minutes, Praveen, but are you okay? Or I know you had an earlier stop. So if you need to go, then we will thank you for participation.
No. No, I'm available. I changed my plan. Okay, I did send a note. I'll be available for the conference. Yeah. Okay, great. So we can, we won't go on for too much longer. We could talk for all day, all night, but we'll move on to sort of next phase. So the next phase, we were going to talk a little bit about some global opportunities post-crisis. I just thought I'd quickly, this is no long thing. I wanted to just quickly share. These were referenced kind of earlier. I pulled this from the ITC, just on some kind of where the automotive parts and accessory exports globally. This is product code 8708. We can see the kind of larger countries, Germany as the leading parts exporter globally. India kind of in the second league there, but as we can see, strong growth over a period of time. Obviously, when trade fell a bit last year, so smaller base but still strong growth. And just to kind of give a flash of what that sort of looks like from some of these official figures, biggest market is US by kind of a ways, but also Germany and Europe coming in there. And then you also see the import share in terms of South Korea and China being and Germany being kind of the leading bit there. So I just kind of wanted to just flash those stats quick, just to give a little bit of context. And I thought I'd start by asking our panel what they think is, just turn off the screen. How would you comment on India's competitiveness as an automotive supply hub, kind of going forward? Where is India particularly likely to excel and can be best in class? Let's start with the sort of best in class, and Vinny, glad to see you volunteering there.
The combined turnover of the industry, as Sanjay said, is $57 billion US, and we export $15 billion. That's about a quarter of our production, and almost 65% of our export goes to North America and Europe. Europe, it's about 33-34%, and the rest to North America. So these are our two largest markets. 80% of our export goes to OEMs and tier ones, and the rest 20% is to the aftermarket. And also, what's aiding our exports is the presence of about 35 to 40 odd IPOs in India who help source, and Praveen is playing an important role in there, heading the IPO forum for ACMA. So this is in a nutshell where we are. And in terms of our competitiveness, I would like to believe within four walls of a factory, we are very, very price competitive. What really sort of beats us is the cost of capital. It's one of the highest in the world. Cost of power or energy, and the logistics costs. And these are factors that are beyond the industry. Some of it is government. The government has to come in and help us out there. But believe you me, within four walls of factory, we can beat anybody in the world.
No doubt about that. You raised some points there on some of the constraints around, kind of energy costs and also logistics there as an issue. So maybe, again, kind of in the context of what we can learn, find opportunities out of this crisis, for example. I mean, oil, obviously prices have collapsed, for example, but that's everywhere. What are some of the key things that we can do in India to improve the competitiveness, especially as we come out of the crisis? Maybe I'll start with Jasjit, particularly from a supply chain logistics point of view.
So while the oil prices have come down to an all-time low, there's been no change in India, and we don't expect as well because the government's coffers are empty. There's no GST collection coming in. So in fact, states like Assam increased the taxes on oil. Oil actually went up yesterday there, while globally it was at almost at a zero and the futures were negative. So we don't have much of a hope coming in from the input side of oil. Toll taxes started back from Monday, and as per an annual hike, they have gone up by 15%. So that's also not changed. So in terms of input, that's not there's nothing kind of silver lining which we have. I think in terms of the logistics, which we have a mixed bag out here. There are a lot of DIY logistics where people do it themselves. There's a supplier who will be doing his own transportation, having a small warehouse, supplying to OEM. And there's some OEMs who work on a just-in-time basis where you have X works. In the case of exports also, you have a mixed bag out there. People are doing a lot of DIY stuff. What we have seen is that if you look at the global, majors like Toyota, maybe a Volkswagen, a Daimler, these are organizations which have got the supply chain and of course Ford to a T. So they would looking at the entire supply chain from supplier to their plant, which each aspect of cost built in, including the visibility of inventory. I mentioned I missed General Motors, again a great company on that. So if people would look at riding on the specialist wave rather than on DIY basis, you will find the logistics cost actually would be amongst the lowest for companies such as these working out of India. But when you do a DIY, then the admin costs actually add up a lot of layers. There's also a lot of lost capacity which goes in because you can't ship out a full container. Whatever air you're shipping out also costs. So these are areas where we can work on. And I think the Indian industry in terms of resilience is very strong. We have had the Euro 6 thrown at us from Euro 4 to Euro 6. We have been able to, look at that. We have, of course, the present crisis. We have had many CMVR rules come in the past few years. We had a demo thing. So overall, it has made us stronger. And India probably at this point in time is at the strongest ever in terms of the tier 1 manufacturers, including, of course, the threat of the changes because of the ICE engine going into electric as well, which we feel may get postponed now, by the way. One, because most of the components for electric are coming from China, which is not in very big favor right now in the country. And second is that oil prices, whatever the impact, will ultimately come into India as well. So we might have the IC engine having a bit longer life than this. So overall, I think both the manufacturers, which is the tier 1, as well as the logistics, they are well geared up for the future. We need to just get our act together better and faster post this thing. I'm quite confident that India would be competitive both in the short and the medium term.
Praveen, again, yes, as an IPO, why don't you? What do you think?
Yeah. First of all, about the India's competitiveness and the areas what we think and the processes that India excels. I would like to comment that when you really look at from as a OE or a tier 1s from the Western region or from the export region, when you really look at it from a consideration of total cost of ownership, I do think that the Indian suppliers generally, of course, there are some challenges in bits and pieces, but generally we excel in manufacturing and quality. We manage the costs in manufacturing very well. A significant amount of investment in the automations that is kind of going on now. So I do believe that this is one real good factor that we see that is coming out from Indian suppliers. And then the second thing is the reliability, whether it is in the context of the trade practice. As we see in some part of the world, it could be in China, that trade practices and especially in terms of the ethical trade practices are by and large very, very strong here. So we have a greater advantage on that Indian setup. And then earlier, I think Sanjay mentioned about the financial credibilities. Even in the 2008 crisis time of it, or even now, we do not see a major financial issues crippling our supply base in India, and that has been a great advantage as it comes to the overall, I would say, the the competitors in the plus areas in the Indian competitor. Going back to Jagjeet's point on the overall supply chain, through the IPOs, we have several initiatives that we have been working on. One of them is how do we improve the overall supply chain effectiveness among the Indian supply base, and that initiative has been quite well progressing. We did one about 4, 5, maybe 5, 6 years back, and we kind of circulated to the auto component manufacturers who are basically members of ACMA. We are again reinitiating the same initiative, so that we know that one of the, I would say, very important link and the cost, and also in terms of performance, is the managing the supply chain, and especially in the logistics side of it. So we are also driving that initiative, which I think should be helpful to all the auto component manufacturers in India.
Fantastic. So we've had quite a few questions come in on this point. Actually, okay, Vikram, why don't you add to that, and then we'll.
Just in addition to what everybody is saying, I think what as industry we can do is scale up. So I think what we get a little bit of a beating from some of our neighbors is the scale and size of being able to deliver to global demands. And I think this is an interesting time from global interest rates being zero or negative or very, very low levels. Especially if you're doing it for export purposes, we may still be able to raise some interesting capital at low costs, which has also been India's Achilles heel in some ways, that our interest costs have been very high, and it has not encouraged capexes and automation. This might be a time, especially for companies that are looking for growth from export markets. So you could be able to borrow in local currencies and hedge against your exports against those currencies. So I think the industry just needs to scale up to meet IPO needs and global supply chain needs if we really want to provide an alternative to some of our wonderful neighbors.
Mm. So yeah, Vinny, because that's actually the question. That was very much the question that was coming in, actually, how to manage the scale and compete with China, for example.
Yeah, just a quick comment. Another opportunity could come our way if we are smart, is that as the world moves over to electric mobility, notwithstanding the oil prices today, there'll be a sizable opportunity for us, because as the world exits electric mobility, we could become a hub for manufacturing of IT products.
Indeed,
So,
there were
Chris,
some questions actually around that. Yes.
I just want to add quickly, in terms of competitiveness, I think it's very important to understand that we are going to have to go the way of the West in terms of automation, in terms of Industry 4.0, because labor cost is not going to be relevant in the medium term, and it's not going to be an advantage for Indian companies. You rightly mentioned power costs being high. We're going to have to address that issue. We're going to have to address the issue of automation and Industry 4.0 in terms of flexibility. And when you look at digitization today, and you look at today, robots, the West will become as competitive as us if we do not address these issues. So these are investments that companies are going to have to make, and therefore it's going to be extremely important to catch on to this trend today as opposed to later. And again, this is a great opportunity for companies that are sitting idle, no revenue coming in, to actually look at optimization of manpower. And I don't mean that in any way of throwing people out, but I mean optimizing manpower and using them effectively, and looking at digitization and automation. That is going to be essential for us to remain competitive and then compete against the Chinas of the world and the West. So you had a question on electrification, or?
Yes, well, I mean, you partly addressed it. In fact, some, both Vinny and you both raised some of the points which exactly were coming through from our audience. So maybe just to kind of build on the bit about the EV, because there's some points about whether India, can be a strong supplier and base, if you like, for EV in future, competing with the likes of China, given the scale, or even Europe as it builds up there. And again, maybe the oil price notwithstanding. So I guess it's sort of your view, or anyone in the panel's view, of how well India can compete in that space, given it's perhaps starting from from further back. And the point that you raised, Sanjay, as well, which is, EV battery and vehicle production is more automated. It is less labor dependent. It's perhaps based on other factors like scale. So if there were any additional points specifically on how India can increase its competitiveness in the EV space in the future, there's quite a few in our audience who are keen to hear about that. Does anybody want to address that further?
Let me have a stab at that. Let me take a stab at that because we're already supplying to electric vehicles in the US. We've actually sort of created almost like a hub here in terms of supply chain. There's a lot of companies in India that are supplying to electric vehicles in the US and in Europe. China has been a challenge to supply to from India, definitely, because of the duty structure. However, the US has not been a challenge, and as that market grows, we're going to grow. We have great capabilities in terms of R&D, in terms of development. We're at par with any other country in the world. We were a build-to-print sort of industry when we started off in the late 80s and the early 90s, and very quickly we adopted technology. We had a lot of joint ventures that came into India. We adopted technology from them. The OEMs have been very supportive in terms of helping component manufacturers adopt technology. And so today we're sitting on a technology platform that we can leverage and create products for anyone in the world. And this has already begun, in terms of supply, from a supply-based perspective. I don't know if anyone else wants to.
So, okay, fantastic. So if anyone else did want to add on to that point, because I think it's covered quite well. Perhaps because I appreciate that we're running kind of low on time. It's been such an interesting discussion. I know from my side, I'd happily moderate us deep into the night, but everybody's got, I'm sure, other things. We can reprise this, obviously get together again and do more of this based on some of the questions that haven't come in. But maybe some concluding points or concluding question that we can end on around around the collaboration point, maybe to get together, because there's quite a few questions that have come in around whether the industry really is ready and willing to collaborate, both to kind of come out of the crisis and then perhaps also to grow globally and competitively and address some of the issues that were just raised. So I guess, if anyone wanted to kind of conclude on any notes about, obviously ACMA is a great route, as we've learned. ACMA can help coordinate this, but are there any kind of further things we would recommend to our audience, to OEMs, even to government, to help promote this collaboration and improve that competitiveness? So perhaps Vikram, I can throw that to you in conclusion, and then if anybody else wants to chime in, we can end on those notes.
And no, thank you. I think the mindsets are completely changing, right? And this is going to be the new normal. So I would imagine that within industry collaborations and collaborating with OEs is going to be the new order of the day. So clearly there are geographical collaborations that will rebuild themselves because there will be supply chain shifts. So there could be people, like we've heard, and we discussed this in the beginning of the conversation, some possibilities of manufacturing and technologies moving out of certain geographies to other geographies. It could happen through collaborations, and most probably it would happen through collaborations. It would happen through co-creating, as we discussed before, with the OEs. And I'm seeing, at least in the last 15, 18 days, there's been far more collaboration within the industry to help each other in any way they can at the owner's level, at the CEO's level, to move on. So I think this is the new way, the new normal. So ultimately, whether it be technology, whether it be just the ability to do some degree of local assembly, there could be different ways to collaborate with different parts of this whole ecosystem. We're clearly learning this from the startup world. The startup world is a complete conglomerate of a massive ecosystem, and they live off each other. And I think this is the time that, in a way, that same mindset will come back to our traditional business, if I put it that way.
So, Chris, I'll make some concluding remarks as well. Further to what Vikram has said, he's absolutely right in terms of the collaboration and the camaraderie that's sort of come about in this time. I'm going to go back to the traditional collaboration model, and I'm going to say that there's going to be a huge opportunity for tier 2 and tier 3 suppliers to collaborate with technology from the West and the East. Like we started our industry in the component space with collaborations from Japan, and there was thanks to Maruti Suzuki at that point, which really gave us the opportunity to build this component industry with collaborations in Japan and bringing technology. This is the time where companies from the West and the East, maybe Japan, Korea, or the United States and Europe can bring in technology to tier 2 and tier 3 suppliers. So it's a great opportunity to come to India, set up a collaboration with local companies here, explore the Indian market, and as well as build a hub for exports, for the global market. And we need the kind of technology that the tier 1 suppliers have in the tier 2 and tier 3 space. We need the kind of cash flow, the money, the capital to invest in these businesses so that we can make them more robust. So, I'd invite any of your listeners today who are interested in bringing in technology into India to, contact us, and Vinny's the right guy to put, everyone in touch with opportunities in India. Thanks so much for having me here, and great sort of interaction with the rest. Thanks to all the panelists.
So thank you, Sanjay, and that point I think is well received, and we'll certainly be happy to facilitate conversations between our audience, both here live and those who will watch afterwards, and in our further communication and articles that we produce. It's a great opportunity. We've had a long history of interacting with India, and we're keen to bring the supply chain together there, also together with ACMA. So that's really a pleasure from my side as well. Thank you for that. If anybody else has any maybe final points, obviously we need to kind of let our audience depart, but unless there's another final point from anybody else, I think I will thank our panelists for their time, participation, the insight, and frankly your openness as well at this time of crisis, when there's many of companies who may retrench and sort of turn inward, literally lock down, I suppose. But clearly we're not seeing that. We're seeing, as was touched upon, greater collaboration, greater coming together, albeit from our living rooms. And I think that's the formula for the supply chain. And Jazda, I think, wants to make a point on that. So he's a better place to make it than me. So Jazda, why don't you make a final point there?
Thanks, Chris. So I think the collaboration part, we now understand the ecosystem is larger than us, much better than earlier. But having said that, we have to now start thinking a little bit more deeper, that end of the day, we are engineering companies, we are supply chain companies. So we need to look at sustainability in a different way. So what are the other things what we can do with the same trucks we have or same plants which we have? There have been a lot of companies who have been making ventilators and other machinery items. We are looking at using a two-wheeler trucks to carry some of the masks which are required to be carried. So we look at sustainability and look at it more from a very holistic perspective, rather than saying that we are part of this auto vertical only. But look at a little bit more broader and have maybe one more string to our bow.
It's an excellent point, and we talk about the new normal, and obviously either by necessity or by kind of charity or opportunity, there's lots of companies who are clearly involved in the front line of the relief effort, and I suspect you're right that this will open up some new areas for businesses anyway, and also not least which they need to provide for their own staff as we go forward before we'll have a vaccine and stuff. But I think that openness, Jajit, is a great point. And we've sort of seen the automotive supply chain is a lot more flexible than maybe people might have thought in terms of how quickly it could turn to produce equipment that was needed. I think the idea of kind of needing to retooling, taking many, many months and stuff, which is maybe the case for a complex vehicle, but actually for some of these critical components are able to do very swiftly and quickly. Vinny, did you want to make a final point there? I think I saw your hand raised.
Thank you. I'm fine. Thank you. All has been said.
Yeah, great. Yeah, it's hand raised. Well, listen, I think from our panel, I want to thank you all again for all of your input and time. Like I said, I think there's more to discuss, more that we'll follow up on and continue to share. So thanks and good night to all of you. Please stay safe. I wish you all the best and your families and colleagues in this time. And as things ease, let's please keep in touch, because we can help and support globally and within India. So do please do that, and let's follow up on that. So thanks again to our panel. Thank you very much. Fantastic session from my side. So you know, as the panel sort of signs off and says good night, I'll just conclude us here in our last minute. You know, I saved this for the very end rather than the beginning, because I don't think I wanted to dwell on the numbers too much. This is what some of our analysts have pointed to, and I'm not going to dwell on the short term really, because it can all change and it will change. But this is some of the outputs. I want to just really draw your attention to where it's going, and that obviously in the crisis we're all in right now, that Indian vehicle demand and production, you know, the outlook remains very positive. Even from our point of view, as we come out of this, and the opportunities, you know, are going to grow. So keep that in mind and work to. We'll have some more out on this in due course from our side, as well as Ultima Media and our analysts, in terms of what we're forecasting and producing. And so we will share that with you. But I just wanted to give a sort of a short glimpse of what the curve and trend line sort of looks like. For those of you who've been tuning in for us every week, thank you for that, and let's continue. We are, as we've talked about in other sessions, this is part of our Automotive Festival of Transformation, in which it's not a festival to celebrate, as we know, but it's a festival of change. So that's digitally coming together, producing more content together, holding sessions and roundtables such as this with key industry leaders, and we're really keen to keep that going and keep doing more of that. So I just wanted to invite you all to get involved, get in touch with me, for example, or my colleagues if you want to do more, because there's a lot more to come from that. And certainly, as I indicate, I think I have a lot more to talk about from the Indian side as well. And that includes what we're doing every week. So these live stream hours, which we're doing. So you're signed up. Keep tuning in. Next week we've got a great global supply chain update with some further insights on what's happening in the global supply chain, and we're really looking forward to sharing some of that with you. In the meantime, for everyone who's still there, thank you again for your time. We'll have the recording of this ready to send out for you either later today or by tomorrow latest, which you'll receive copies of, and some of the slide decks as well. And obviously, we'll keep the contact open with ACMA for you, so that if you want to get in touch directly, you can. Again, from my side, good night, and we will see you soon. Thanks again.
Thank you. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Everyone, thank you. Bye. Thank you, Chris.
Bye-bye now. Bye.